Greetings, my dear viewers. Welcome back to another Dungeons & Dragons video. You probably clicked on this video because you know exactly what we'll be talking about today. And for those of you who are new to this little series that I've created, let me go ahead and give you a question. Are your spells good enough for you? Do you find these spells in the player's handbook and subsequent side books to be lacking? Do you find that the spells in your Magic the Gathering cards add a bit more pizzazz to your story? And have you ever thought about creating spells based off of those cards? Well, today that is actually what we are going to be talking about. This is part 2 of my Homebrew series, where we take a look at the cards of Magic the Gathering and try to convert them the best we can to usable stat blocks and spells for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. And I think I have found a way to at least try to balance a spell from the card game into 5th edition for your next session. Whether it be a spell you give to your players or a spell you give to one of your monsters. We are going to be taking a look at the ways that we can homebrew our own spells and tweak the rules slightly to suit our conversions. Well, mostly it's going to be tweaking the conversions. If you want to learn how to create your own spells within Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, I do have a video just for that. In this video, we are taking a look at what ways we can convert the cards into playable spells. So, let's go ahead and get started, shall we? Starting things off with my equation for figuring out the level of a spell. There are a lot of different cards, and each one has a mana cost. So we're going to be using the mana cost to help us figure out what their level is. That way we best know how powerful the spell is. And how am I getting this calculation? Well, in the last video, we talked about spell points. And I went over the extensive rules in that one page that we had gotten for spell points. And we're going to be using spell points today to figure out how strong a spell is based on the mana cost. Using the following equation. The converted mana cost plus our rarity bonus squared. So if it's an uncommon spell, it will be +1 squared. And then we add an additional +1 to the entire equation. So for example, let us take the spell Tome Scour. This 1 mana spell is of common rarity. So it will cost us 2 spell points, or the equivalent of a first level spell slot. Likewise, Counterspell has 2 different rarities, not including the promotional rarity. We're actually going to be excluding promotional rarities from this equation, as while they do seem to be of rare rarity, we're not going to be counting them for equations, as they seem to be an outlier compared to the other rarities. For instances where we have multiple rarities, like with Counterspell, Common, and Uncommon, we are going to be using the highest rarity available. so uncommon. This means that we have 4 spell points to work with. 2 for our converted mana cost. Our rarity bonus squared. 1 squared is still just 1. So that's 3 spell points, and then we add our 4th point to the equation for a total of 4 spell points, making it a 3rd level spell, which, according to the core rules, Counterspell is indeed a 3rd level spell. Now that we got that settled, why don't we go ahead and take a look at a couple of abilities that I had originally covered in my monster conversion video, as I did make a few changes based off of some of the effects that I have read since creating that first video. But before we get into that, let's go ahead and talk about the casting time and duration. There are 3 different types of spells within Magic the Gathering: sorceries, instants, and enchantments. We only have, technically, 1 type of spell, but multiple schools. So the spell type from Magic the Gathering is going to help us determine the casting time and the duration of said spell. A sorcery is going to take 1 action to cast, while an instant would either take a bonus action or a reaction. More often than not, you'll probably see it as a bonus action, with some spells probably having both a bonus action and a reaction, depending on the situation. While enchantments will take 1 action to cast, but can also have an upward casting of 1 or more hours, such as plant growth. For durations, most of the time you're going to have an instantaneous effect with your sorceries and instances, but some spells may last a little bit longer. You should consult the card to see how long this might take. For example, it might say that it will last until the end of your turn or the end of your opponent's turn. For these instances, you would have to look at the initiative order to determine how long this will last. You could say that the spell lasts until initiative count 0. It could last until the end of the target's turn, or perhaps they need to make a subsequent saving throw at the start of their turn. It all depends on the spell. The tricky part was getting to enchantments. Enchantments would probably last anywhere from 1 to 10 minutes. Obviously, they would require concentration, which does limit how many enchantments a spellcaster can indeed cast, unless they had a special ability to do so. Now, there is an alternative to this duration. Some spells do allow for a 1-hour casting or more, and when this does happen, the duration starts to last longer. Sometimes it'll be between 8 to 24 hours, or sometimes it just becomes permanent. Now, I haven't figured out the range or the radius of spells. That would probably be more up to you as the dungeon master, but you could probably take a good guess at the range depending on the spell. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at those abilities that I had promised earlier. Let's start with the land. When a land enters the battlefield and when a player sacrifices a land card. This took a lot longer to figure out than I would like to admit. I had gone through all the different abilities for a creature to have, and this was one of the last ones I was finally able to figure out. So, what does it mean for a land to enter the battlefield, and what does it mean for a land to be sacrificed? Not destroyed, but sacrificed. Well, for a player to have a land enter the battlefield, this is effectively increasing your spell points, the available spell points that you have. So, for entering the battlefield, the player's effective level increases by 1 point for each land. When calculating their maximum available spell points until they finish a long rest. This is not permanent. Upon increase this maximum value, the target gains spell points equal to the difference between the old and new maximum available spell points. For example, a level 10 wizard has a maximum spell point of 64. They currently have 50 spell points remaining when they gain this one effective level. So their maximum spell points go up by the difference, which is a total of 9. And because of this difference, they gain 9 more spell points to their quote-unquote mana pool. So they would have 59 spell points remaining. This has the exact opposite effect when a player has to sacrifice a land. The effective level decreases by 1 when calculating maximum available spell points until they finish a long rest. If the maximum decreases below the player's current available spell point total, the player also begins to lose that many spell points. Going back to our level 10 wizard with 50 spell points available, they will lose 2 effective levels, dropping the maximum spell points to 20. This means they're going to have to lose 6 spell points by this effect. Note, this effective level only affects the player's spell points and spell slots. It will not affect the number of spells they have prepared. I want to make that clear. That's going to be for a different ability. I wanted to make sure that this land increasing and decreasing did feel right for this ability. Stuff like Burgeoning and Magma Rift. If you are losing access to your spell points, you are going to be able to regain those spell points at the end of a long rest. That way, it's only going to be punishing during the adventuring day that it happens. It's not going to be forever. Now, moving on to mana, as these two abilities are a little bit different. And I do want to point out that in my spell point video that I did recommend having color-aligned mana. And these mana ramps were the reason why. Anyway, when you have an ability that has you gaining spell points, you will have the total spell points gained be equal to the total mana added plus your rarity bonus squared plus 1, much like with how we calculated the spell's level. Next is going to be draw and discard. This one was a little bit tricky, and I did not like the original ability that I had for it. So I decided to change it and make a small table based off of what could possibly happen when you quote-unquote draw or discard a card. I have 4 different outcomes for drawing and discarding. They are equal and opposite effects. And when you are drawing, it's going to be most of the time at random. And discarding, sometimes it will be random, but there are chances where an opponent can choose what card is discarded. So the Dungeon Master could end up rolling this die instead of the player. Alternatively, there are cards that say that this discarding of a card is a cost. And for that, I would say that you would have a material component that is consumed by the spell instead. Now, what are these drawing and discarding benefits and debuffs? Well, for drawing a card, we have preparing one additional spell from your class's spell list, or spell book if you're a wizard, until you finish a long rest. Subsequently, the discard ability is that you unprepare one spell you currently have prepared until you finish a short rest. Again, not a detriment, not at least a permanent detriment. It's rather short. You'll probably have one or two combats where you will not have access to a specific spell, and take a short rest, and you regain that prepared spell. Not a big deal. Next, gain one charge or use of a magic item you own that lets you cast a spell. Subsequently, discarding a card could cause you to lose one charge or use of a magic item you own that lets you cast a spell. Any scroll that drops you 0 uses is instantly destroyed. We talked about this little spell scroll change in the spell points video. I do recommend checking that out if you haven't already. Third point is that you gain one additional use of a class or racial feature. Discarding would cause you to lose one use of a class or racial feature. Kind of like a action surge. Or perhaps you'll have a special spell from one of your racial abilities that you can only use a certain number of times per day. Drawing could let you gain an extra use of that spell. And then finally, you gain one hit die or lose one hit die. Again, not that bad. Some people don't even care about their hit dice that much. So this wouldn't be too much of a debuff, but can be a significant buff for certain characters that need hit dice in order to use some of their abilities. Like I mentioned, there are cards that have you pay a cost by discarding a card, while some cards just have an additional ability that you may choose to do. So, I don't know. I think it's flavored different from effect to effect. This is totally up to you as a dungeon master how this can be perceived. Alternatively, for cards like Incinerating Blast, you may discard a card, so you roll on a table once and take one of the debuffs, and then you draw a card, roll on the table, gain a benefit from the draw. Like I said, effect to effect, spell to spell. It might be different. But I think this is an interesting take on this ability. Moving on from not exactly away from the draw effect, we are going over to scrying. You're going to be rolling on the draw table and taking note of the result. Next time you would draw a card, you have a roll that matches any scrying result you have noted, you can choose to either take the result of your draw or re-roll it. If you choose to re-roll, the matched scry result is lost, and you must take the new result. I took inspiration from the Portent ability of the Divination Wizard for this. Like I said, some of these effects aren't that great, like gaining a hit die, or perhaps gaining a use of an item. Maybe you don't have a magic item just yet, so you won't be able to gain that benefit. So you would probably use your scrying to give yourself a leg up and try to avoid gaining that result that would otherwise be useless to you. I think that's fair. Next is damage calculation. I did not really like the idea of the damage die being 10 in the DMG, so I decided to change how damage calculation is done. Some spells would have been too powerful, some spells would have been way too weak. So I decided to put together this little table to best suit our needs for damage. And I made a small little equation to help determine how many damage dice would be put into the spell. It would be the card's damage plus the rarity bonus squared. And I have two examples for you: Concussive Bolt and Chandra's Flame Wave. Concussive Bolt and Chandra's Flame Wave have the same mana cost, so I thought this would be a fitting little example. Concussive Bolt is a one-target ability, so it'll be using the D6 damage die. Since it is of common rarity, there are only going to be 4d6 hitting this one singular target. With Chandra's Flame Wave, it is of rare rarity, so we would actually be getting 6 damage dice, and since this is an AoE effect, it's going to be doing d8 damage. So, 6d8 damage to all targets. And if you are going for a life gain spell, you are going to be using the same calculations. Next is the destroy target. This one was definitely an interesting one, and it actually confused me a little bit in the original video, but I think I am going to keep most of it the same. If you're destroying an artifact, spells like Disintegrate are your best bet. Destroying a creature, Powered Word Kill, or the Banshee's Wail are adequate examples. Destroying an enchantment would cause a Dispel Magic or Remove Curse-like ability to be used. But then you have cards like land cards, and you also have the new class, background, and even lesson enchantments, which have different effects on a player, and I'm going to be getting into that a little bit later. But first, let's talk about destroying a land. This almost took as long as sacrificing a land did, as the ability to destroy land, it was kind of hard to calculate. Mostly it was the area of effect that would cause the land to be destroyed. What constituted the area of a land? So I had to kind of think about this, as we have a couple different types of land. Take the non-basic lands, for example, your gates, your towers, your temples. They would be considered gargantuan-sized objects, with some form of connection to the ley line. They still produce mana, most of the time. So stuff like Disintegrate and Hollow should be able to work for these instances, but crumbling them to dust isn't enough for the actual terrain where you're able to regenerate your mana from. So, for these type of spells, I would like to include the following ability when you destroy a land. This is going to be a condition called Destroyed Terrain. Creatures who take a long rest in this terrain cannot regain spell points or the uses of any spell-like abilities such as Wild Shape, Arcane Recovery, or Divine Smite, but only while you're in this terrain. Additionally, all creatures treat this area as difficult terrain for the purposes of travel and moving during combat. I think this is fair. So long as you're inside the destroyed terrain, you're not going to be able to regain access to the ley lines. You need to have access to those ley lines in order to get back your spell points. You need to get your divine energy back. And you cannot do that if you do not have a connection to those ley lines. So, while in this destroyed terrain, you don't have access to it. You do not gain the benefits of your long rest for the purposes of spells and spell-like abilities. But once you leave the terrain, you're fine. And that is where we have a small problem. What is the measurements for this destroyed terrain? Well, for this, I decided to use plant growth as a baseline. A 1 mile radius should be a maximum area if the spell takes 8 or more hours to cast. If it's a smaller casting time, then it'll probably be smaller, much like with plant growth. 1 mile radius or 2 mile diameter seems to be fitting for a land card. Or 5,280 feet. Alright, now we're going to get into the rest of the sacrificing abilities. If a creature is sacrificed, a creature you are allied to dies. If you are sacrificing an artifact, an item on your person specified by the spell is destroyed. Now for the enchantment. And this is where things get a little bit more complicated, but I think I finally figured it out. For sacrificing an enchantment, you're going to either end your concentration on a spell you are concentrating on, lose 1 boon that is affecting you, or lose access to 1 feat, or background or class feature. Any class feature lost this way must be of the highest level available. For example, a level 12 fighter loses access to their extra attack ×2 feature. They'll still have access to their extra attack, it just goes from an extra attack ×2 to an extra attack ×1. If they've already lost access to extra attack ×2, they will instead lose access to Indomitable. You regain access to lost feats or background or class features by the effect of Greater Restoration or similar magic, but can only gain 1 back with each individual casting. I'm sure some old-timey Dungeons & Dragons players have had their ears perk up a little bit, and then rethought of some of the other abilities I went over. This sounds awfully familiar, and that was a complete accident. I'll be perfectly honest. Why would this sound familiar to old-school Dungeons & Dragons players? Well, back in, I think it was called Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, there was an ability known as Level Drain. Now you see where I'm going with this. In Level Drain, you would not only lose access to your class features, but your extra hit points. You would lose access to some of your prepared spells. You would lose access to a lot of your spell slots. And if you ever hit level 0, technically speaking, I think you died if you hit level 0. But with a lot of these abilities that I'm going over with you today, they are coincidentally very similar to this level drain process. But they're all separate abilities. They all do something that is similar to level drain. Sacrifice an enchantment, you have a chance of losing access to your highest class feature. Or maybe your background feature. Losing a card from your hand has the chance of you unpreparing one of your spells. Milling, you decrease your intelligence. Sacrifice a land, your spell points drop. -1 toughness will decrease your constitution. -1 power could decrease your strength. It's just similar. It's very coincidental. It was not intentional to make it similar to the level drain, but after I had learned how level drain actually worked, I thought it was hilarious. And it could be useful for your big bad evil guy, or coincidentally could also work for your players against the big bad evil guy. Have your big bad evil guy be like a level 20 wizard. One of your players has them sacrifice an enchantment. They go down one of their best abilities. Maybe they discard a card and they unprepare that big O spell that they were hoping to cast that combat. Your players will have a great time using this ability. You'll have a fun time using this ability and seeing the look on your players' faces as they slowly lose their resources, which could inspire your players to do certain things outside of combat. Maybe they get access to a couple of spell scrolls, some extra potions. Maybe they'll get access to a magical item that lets them regain anything that they've lost previously. Maybe they'll even try to find ways to use Greater Restoration more often. But these abilities were just some of the things that I've been able to figure out for this conversion series. What do you think? Let me know in the comments down below. And what spell would you like in a Dungeons & Dragons game? Until next time, this has been Drahjan, and I am offline.